The mission of AQI, the forerunner of ISIS, was to kill anyone it could. In my co-author's area of operations, the terrorist group was in the habit of launching mortar shells in the general vicinity of American soldiers. But instead of hitting our bases, the shells kept hitting in and around local villages. Our soldiers had been hunting for the mortar crew for days, but without success. The mortar was kept in the back of a pickup truck. The terrorists would race out to a firing point, fire 2 or 3 deadly shells, then race back under cover before anyone could see them. While their fire had not yet claimed any American lives, the Iraqi civilians were not so lucky. AQI fired at American bases, around American bases, and sometimes directly into Iraqi villages, even when no Americans were within miles. Finally, on one very hot afternoon in July, our soldiers got lucky. Very lucky. The terrorists had pressed their luck in daylight, rushing out to a firing point next to a small stand of trees in the bleak Diyala countryside. They did not see or hear the American Apache helicopter hovering 2 miles away. When AQI fired, the Apache crew saw the puff of smoke from the mortar, then the impact near an Iraqi village, and immediately swung to attack. As the helicopter approached, ready to fire its cannon and destroy the mortar truck, the terrorists heard the thump of the rotors, jumped out of the truck, and ran away. There were 4 men. 3 went one way, 1 went the other. The Apache directed nearby American ground troops to intercept the group of 3 while it tracked the lone runner with its gun camera. He was running straight into a village, ducking under the shade of houses, sprinting as fast as his legs could carry him. But he was running out of room. In mere moments, he would run out of the village and into the open desert, where the Apache would get a clear shot. At the last possible moment, just before the Apache pulled the trigger to end the terrorist's life, he did what so many of them did. He grabbed the human shield. He scooped up a small child, cupping a young boy in his left arm like a football, and kept running. Could the American crew fire? If they did, and the child was hurt, who would be legally responsible for the child's death? Under the law of war, there was no doubt the terrorist was a war criminal. He violated multiple provisions of the law of war. His indiscriminate mortar fire was only occasionally aimed at military targets, so he violated the rule of necessity. His attacks were not necessary to accomplish legitimate military objectives. By dressing like a civilian and firing at civilian and military targets alike, he was doubly guilty of violating the rule of distinction. He did not distinguish between military and civilian targets, and through his civilian clothes, he tried to blend in with civilians as much as possible, increasing the risk that American return fire would inadvertently hurt the innocent. Then, by scooping up the child, he not only engaged in hostage-taking, but immediately mistreated his captive by intentionally placing that child in mortal danger. Moreover, as a war criminal, he was legally responsible for all the harm that resulted from his crimes, not only the deaths that may have resulted from his mortar attacks, but the deaths that resulted when American forces used their right of self-defense. In other words, if American forces fired and the child died, the terrorist would be legally responsible for the child's death. So yes, we had the right to fire. The war criminal was the terrorist, not the Apache air crew. But the Apache crew, like so many Americans before and after them, did not fire. They did not press that trigger. They could not bear to kill a child, and they knew something that the terrorists forgot. The day was very, very hot. 125 degrees hot. And kids are heavy. So our soldiers waited and watched as he carried the child for almost a full kilometer before collapsing, exhausted, in the open desert. While the Apache hovered over him, American soldiers closed in and captured him. Tragedy was averted. Talk to virtually any American or Israeli veteran of a combat unit, and he can tell you several stories that are remarkably similar. And they usually do not have happy endings. Soldiers ambushed from mosques have to return fire. Terrorist leaders surround themselves with civilians so often that troops face the terrible choice of either allowing terrorists to roam free and execute deadly attacks, or having to kill them and face the reality of civilian deaths. A terrible and hidden reality of both America's and Israel's wars is that hundreds of soldiers have fallen, killed by terrorists, because they were being cautious with civilian lives. This is an impulse that is utterly alien to jihadists, but is a core value for Americans and Israelis. Terrorists take a life for the purpose of taking a life. American and Israeli soldiers take a life in the effort to save civilians. So why then does the UN and much of the international left try to turn American and Israeli soldiers into war criminals? Why do they claim that Americans or Israelis are responsible for civilian deaths when it is the terrorists who strike from schools, hospitals, and mosques, often while using women and children as human shields? The answer is relatively simple. The UN and international left often want to see terrorists prevail. They want Israel and America to take terrible losses, to withdraw, and to accommodate terrorist demands. So they wage lawfare. A good definition of lawfare is the abuse of international law and legal processes to accomplish military objectives that can't be accomplished on the battlefield. Can't beat the IDF? Use the International Criminal Court to tie its hands, restricting its operations until terrorist forces have the upper hand. Can't stop American attacks on Al-Qaeda? Use the UN to try to declare its drone strikes unlawful, placing America in a terrible bind. Either risk boots on the ground or let terrorists plot and plan in safety and security. At the ACLJ, we've confronted this lawfare directly. After the 2008 Gaza war, called Operation Cast Lead, Palestinian officials attempted to charge Israel with war crimes in the International Criminal Court, a tribunal typically reserved for the worst war criminals in the world. Yet Israel's alleged crimes were nothing of the sort. Indeed, Israel's protective measures, including sending text messages or phone calls to civilian areas in danger of airstrikes, far exceed even America's. After a multi-year effort, which included multiple oral interventions at the ICC, we succeeded in persuading the ICC to drop the case. Unfortunately, however, the left never admits defeat, it just tries again. So, Israel once again faces international condemnation and investigation for military tactics that are more conservative than America's. If Israeli soldiers are judged to be war criminals, then so will our own men and women in uniform, and the terrorists will have won a dramatic victory without ever winning a battle. Chapter 8.